Becoming a cultural explorer, that's our next session. A cultural explorer, that is Jake Finnifrog. Today, he joins us from Seattle on the West Coast in the US. His PhD he did some years ago, or many years ago, on multilingual minorities in rural China. So that's quite a cultural jump. He's today the Director of Asia for AGTA, and he is the founder of and CEO of True Travel Adventure. So you can hardly get more of a cultural traveler, a cultural explorer than Jake. Jake, I'm very excited to hear what you have to tell us.
Thank you, Jan. You are going to die. You're going to die. The thought flashed through my head. I was nothing more than a speck of sand tumbling in the surf. Violent water surged into my sinuses. My legs ragdolled above my head, and all I could do was shelter my skull with my arms and hope the reef or my surfboard didn't crash through my skull. 10 seconds, 15 seconds. I was held under by the churning Indian Ocean wave. Panic filled my mind. I tumbled uncontrollably. Panic and then anger. I should have known better. I should have prepared better. I should have chosen a smaller surf break. I was scared to death. 8 months later, I was in a crowd of 30 people waiting for a bus in Kunming, China. It was my first day ever in this country of 1.4 billion people. The bus surged to a stop as the crowd pushed to the front door, my brain processing in overdrive. How does this work? There's too many people. There's too little space on the bus. The door opened directly in front of my wife and 10-month-old baby boy, who flowed with the crowd to the door and stepped in. A grandma, carrying an open basket full of vegetables on her back, wedged her way in front of me and was pushing to the step. I did the math in an instant, and I knew I wouldn't make it on the bus. Again, panic. I was under the wave again. Because the bus, with a capacity of 40, easily had 80 passengers on it already, and only 4 had exited the rear door. I couldn't even see daylight through the windows to the other side. I was about to be separated from my wife and baby in a city of 7 million with no way to communicate. I could feel my pulse pounding in the back of my head, and a flash of sweat went over my scalp. The air brake hissed, and Grandma made her move for the last foot of space inside the door. I knew at that moment it was kill or be killed. In an instant, I violated every rule of decorum that my mother had ever taught me. Ladies first, don't push, let others go ahead. I'm not sure exactly how it happened, but let's just say that Grandma had to take the next bus. Three years earlier, I stepped down from the Land Rover into the blazing sun, the Maasai Mara, puffing clouds of red dust with every footfall. My Maasai friend and his wife were greeting their kin in the Maasai language as I stood at a distance. A group of teenage girls with short cropped hair and beaded necklaces shyly whispered to each other and giggled, glancing in my direction. The wife noticed and quickly gave an order to my friend. He hurried into the house and came out with a smooth, hard stick, 1/2 inch in diameter and 4 feet in length. I have it here with me today. It was similar to the one that he was carrying. "This is for you," he said. "Always carry it when you're outside." I was thinking, okay, cool, I can do that. It's a nice stick. "Always," he said sternly. Then, as he turned away, almost as an afterthought, he asked, "Do you know what they were saying about you?" Of course, he knew that I didn't know, but I said as much. I wasn't sure. "They said you look like a woman." "A woman?" I asked. "Yes, only women walk outside without a stick." 3 years later, sit on 6-inch high stools, huddled around the charcoal fire. Homegrown mustard greens boil in a pot over the glowing coals. Small bowls with fried eggs and roasted peanuts sit on the small round table encircling the hot pot. And tonight, to honor us, a chicken gave its life, her offering floating in the soup amongst the greens. The youngest daughter, not yet 5 years old, came to me with care, a small cup of rice wine in her tender hands. Brave black eyes met mine as she breathed deeply, paused a mere second, then burst into confident song. It was a song of blessing. As she sang, her tiny hands pressed the cup to my lips and tipped forward with perfect pace, the home-brewed offering stinging slightly it came in my mouth. In just seconds, molecules of rice that her family had planted 2 years before would reach every cell in my body. There were 2 small bowls nestled between the peanuts and the eggs. They were filled with hot pepper, vinegar, and salt. They were used for dipping the greens. You take the chopsticks, grab some greens from the hot pot, or maybe some meat, and you dip them into these 2 bowls to add spice to every bite of food. We were used to this, but tonight, one of those bowls was different. The sauce was cloudy instead of clear, and it was kind of a maroon color. Without noticing, my wife dipped into the cloudy bowl, swirled around, and took a big bite of greens. Horrified, I tried to catch her eye and get her to stop. "This is awesome," she exclaimed in Chinese, to the delight of our hosts, then added in English to me, "You should try some." Without knowing it, my wife, a public health nurse who discourages me from eating rare steak, just ate a bite of greens coated in raw chicken blood. So what does this mean? What do these stories have in common? In each case, I was in a setting where I wasn't in control. Sometimes I didn't know what was going on. Sometimes I was in over my head. Sometimes I was scared. Sometimes I was fine, but just confused. In my life as a cultural explorer, I've been in many such settings. If I had enough time, I'd tell you thousands of stories. But I've learned over time that there are ways to understand a new culture more quickly by being observant. So if you want to be a cultural explorer, I'd like to share with you some of the ways in which we communicate. You can be aware of them when you go into another culture, to another country, or another place where you feel unfamiliar. These languages I like to call the 12 languages of culture. You see them here. The verbal, written, and numeric languages, they seem pretty familiar to us. We think about them as languages, even pictorial. Verbal, of course, there are about 7,000 languages in the world. Many of them have written scripts, but not all. And numeric, we can understand that that's a language. If you get into an elevator in New York City, you might not see the number 13. If you get into that elevator in Beijing, you might not see the number 4, because those numbers communicate things to people within those cultures. And pictorial, you might think of signs and symbols for a nation on a flag or for a religious institution. We think that those pictures or those symbols carry meaning. As we go further into this list, artifactual, those are the things that we might carry, the clothes we wear, the brand of car that we might drive. Audio, researchers say that about 38% of meaning in language comes from the intonation and the pace with which we speak. Kinesic, that's how we move our body, how we go through space. And optical, that has to do with light, colors and the meanings of colors. What color should I wear to a funeral in the Middle East? That might be different than the culture I would wear to a funeral in Seattle. So all of these things have meaning. you look at this photo here, back to the story, everything you know is wrong. You see the stick I have here with me today, and you see my friend and his stick, and some other things, some other artifacts that he has in that setting that communicate meaning to the people around him. You see here this idea of movement and of space, and how it's used in one culture is very different from another culture. Moving down on this list, we see these other things that are languages, but we don't often think of them as languages. Tactile. What do we touch? Who do we touch? When do we touch? In the United States, it might be okay for me to put my arm around my wife as we're walking down the street to express my love for her. But if I was to do that in Kenya, the meaning that people see is very different. It could even be offensive. Spatial. How do we organize our space? How close do we stand in line? When is it okay to move in front of another person without offending them? These things are more subtle languages. Temporal. How do we use time? In some cultures, it's very important to arrive to a meeting 5 minutes before the meeting starts. But if you have something else to do, you can leave early. In other cultures, it doesn't matter when you arrive to the meeting, but no one leaves until the meeting is over and everything has been decided. And then olfactory. This is the language that is communicated through tastes and smells, the things that we feel are common. When we share these things over a meal and we're sharing the same food, we build unity, we build bonds, we develop comfort with other people. Here in this photo, you see the very moment that I described earlier, and you see the pictorial language in the background on the drapes. You see some spatial language with how close we are to one another. You see some tactile language. What am I holding and touching? What is she holding and touching? You see artifacts. What are we wearing that say something about us? And then the olfactory is there, the deepest of these languages. In this photo, you even get to see the bowl of dip that I was talking about, close to my left knee. If you look at this image, you'll see the 12 languages displayed. From the bottom to the top, verbal, written, numeric, pictorial, artifactual, audio, and so on. And then you see two continua. On the left-hand side, you see a continua of consciousness. The languages at the bottom of this pyramid we're more conscious of. We think of them as languages. And so when you go to another country, you might buy a guidebook and decide to read up on a certain language so that you can navigate. Or you might learn some of the written language. But we very often don't think of olfactory or temporal or spatial as ways that we communicate. You see on that continua, the higher you get, the less conscious we are that these are languages. But researchers also say that 93% of our communication is nonverbal. So these are languages we should pay attention to. On the right-hand side, you'll see that this continua is the continua of believability. The languages at the bottom, verbal, written, numeric, those can be easily manipulated, so they're less believable. As you go deeper into them, they become more believable. So as you enter into another culture and think about these 12 languages of culture, think about how you might be communicating with the people with which you interface. So what does this mean for you as a cultural explorer? Cultural connection is a core part of adventure travel and what we promote at the ATTA. So we want you to prepare yourself for a cultural experience before you go to another place by reading about cultural norms, talking to people that may have gone, or better yet, talking to people that are maybe from that place. Then when you're there, the 12 languages are a useful tool to observe what you encounter. And you can talk about it with your travel companions. You can journal about it. You can be an investigator as you're a cultural explorer in a different place. Make sure to look carefully at the more believable languages to find out what type of behavior is acceptable here. What type of actions should I do by taking my cues from the people around me? And lastly, cultural explorers are good guests. When you travel, try as much as possible to adapt to the host culture behavior. You will have a deeper experience, and chances are you'll be welcomed back. That's it.
Thank you so much, Jake. It was very interesting. It was very, very well presented, and it fits very well with a lot of the talks, the presentations we heard on day one, building bridges, learning about different cultures. Jake, it was a great pleasure. Thank you so much.